The ideas expressed in the following presentations are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ACI or its committees. ACI web sessions are recorded at ACI conventions or other concrete industry events and will be made available for viewing free of charge for 1 week. Thereafter, they will be archived on the ACI website or added to ACI's online CEU program, depending on their content. You can earn continuing education credits through ACI's online CEU program. Visit www.concrete.org to register. ACI conventions provide an opportunity for networking and for keeping up to date with the latest in concrete technology and practices.
All right, thank you for attending. I have to say, though, it was really funny. I was talking to some colleagues at the opening reception, and they were saying, oh, hot topics. They thought I said hot tub. So if you have some confusion, it's not the place. Anyway, I'm going to talk about avoiding litigation and managing the risks of LEED certification, because it kind of has some interesting issues involved with it. Most of you have probably seen that green design is really upon us today. You can look at all the various green incentives that are out there. There are by states, localities, state governments, a lot of the federal agencies, public school jurisdictions, and then institutes of higher education. And each of them adopt things quite differently. So it's very important to understand many of the points that are going on in sustainable design. Certainly we have command and control type regulations. Certainly we've seen San Francisco and California leading the way when we looked at things like building code for all new construction in the California Building Code. More certainly now that we've seen the Green Construction Code, the International Green Construction Code, and that has offered some additional requirements or what I want to say optimization that's allowable in sustainable structures. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how maybe it's changed the liability issues. So we have to keep all of this in mind. When we look at green building incentives, there have been several that are addressed within sustainable design. It comes from the government in a lot of perspectives when there's been governmental initiatives or executive orders, but certainly we've seen other things like fee-bates, where we have lower CO2 limits, and certainly we've seen that in Portland and San Francisco, the states of Washington. We've certainly seen tax credits or zoning allowances. Some of the other things that are maybe not monetarily balanced are things like expedited permitting in Chicago. If you're doing a green building permit, and depending upon the level of certification you're looking for, you may go to the top of the line of the permit category. Whereas if you're not doing a green building, you're kind of slept off for a while. So certainly there are incentives that are out there to build in a green or a sustainable manner. I'm going to talk mainly about LEED because LEED is really the de facto certification process that is out there for buildings. Now certainly there are other rating systems. When we look at the Federal Highway Administration, we look at roads, we look at infrastructure, they all have different but underlying the same type of principles. But I'm going to talk mainly about LEED because LEED has really offered us a plethora of examples when it comes to what I call litigation, which means that there is litigation surrounding the LEED rating system. There's multiple versions of LEED, which then actually make things a little more dicey. And certainly you have to understand the version of LEED you're working in and also the version of LEED you're working in, because there are several versions that are ongoing at the same time. For example, version 4 is coming out, but they're still employing version 2009. So they'll have that for a couple years and there will be overlap. When we look at the LEED project certification system, it's based on a point system. Now this is, quote, voluntary, but it's not so voluntary in some parts of the United States. For example, if we're in Ohio, every single school that is now built in the state of Ohio, which is the state I reside in, must meet silver certification. And they kind of give you extra bonus credits if you get to a higher certification level. LEED is a point-based system. And certainly if we look at the points, we can see that there's a basic certification all the way to a platinum certification. And what we find is that some of the rebates or the fee-bates or some of the tax abatements are all based on the level of certification that you obtain. So in some cases, you're looking for gold certification, you might get more tax rebates, gold, than if you were just certified. So here comes an area where we talk about that if we don't meet certain criteria, it could become very costly to the owner, or if you don't meet it as a contractor, they will come back at you and look at what I call litigation. When we look at the LEED rating system, it's really based upon some design guidelines compliance, but also application documentation. So when I look at the design guideline compliance, it's really your architects and your engineers. And then when we go to the application documentation, it's more of your contractor base. So here in both cases, two things must be met. Both require some construction management expertise. But certainly, I see with our contractor base, they pretty much have less knowledge than our architectural base. And so here's where we really need to have some caution and some direction. Typically, when we look at the documentation process, a LEED accredited professional is in charge of gaining all the documents, making sure there are appropriate sign-offs, making sure that this documentation gets submitted to the Green Building Certification Institute. So they have a very large role to play in the certification of buildings. Now, this architect that is doing this can be someone that is part of the architectural team that is actually building the structure, or it can be a consultant. Most of the litigation that has gone around LEED really didn't begin until 2007, because we started to see then, as I said before, we started to see fee-bates, we started to see different types of governmental support to sustainable construction. When we look at the documentation, that documentation really varies. And so having a LEED AP in charge, they kind of have to crack the whip and make sure everything comes together at the right stage so that the building can receive some sort of certification. So they are held somewhat accountable in the long run. Typically you have templates that are signed off on, and these can be very simplistic, whereas this is not a brownfield site. Geotech engineer signs off, that's all you need. However, there are more difficult documentation, such as looking at recycled credits, where it requires a lot more documentation. And this is usually required by the contractor, who has little to no LEED training. So it becomes quite onerous for some of the contractors to take on some of this responsibility. When we look at certification, you first register your project, then you track the progress of the document and also of the project, and then you have some completion of construction. You have then approximately 1 year to get the rest of the documentation together and apply for certification. As a manufacturer of cementitious materials, I get more requests at the 12th hour or the 24th hour to help make this certification happen because of potential litigation. So let's talk about what happens when you fail to get LEED certification or the level of LEED certification that you're looking for. You might have to forfeit your tax benefits. You might have to forfeit public grants. In one case, Destiny USA, which is a very green, quote, community and mall area down in Florida, was looking at having to forfeit all of their green bonds. And in their green bonds, that was several millions of dollars that they would have owed the IRS had they not had the correct documents in place. You have loss of expedited permitting. You have failure to comply with mandatory LEED requirements. Certainly there's a lot of different examples that I'm going to show you today of where we need to really look at how we specify. We look at our codes of conduct. We look at what is the responsibility of the architect, of the specifier, of the contractor, and they all vary. When we look at the risk that's associated with these, it includes standard of care. We look at contractual liability. We think of what are the new green laws that are out there right now, because they are constantly changing. Sustainability is not stagnant. It is ever moving. It's not constant. and we constantly see new rating systems which are impacting those that are involved in the project design. Certainly we have climate change that's impacting us right now. I'm not sure we're seeing it right now outside, considering it's snowing, but certainly we see it in other areas where we have large disaster events. We have product liability and false advertising. Some of the issues that are surrounding this is really the outdated construction contracts that are typically existing. We have someone that has dealt in contractuals and in contractual law for a very long time, but they're not familiar with the new premise of sustainable design. You see more integrated design process in sustainable design, which brings in a host of new issues. Who is responsible? I thought this person was responsible, but now it's I'm responsible. So there's a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration. There's a lot of imprecise constructual language and contractual language. And now we see that in some ways we've really, as I said, if we looked at design compliance versus the actual construction, there's a lot of little things that must be taken care of to have a successful project. One of the things that has very much changed in the last several years is the potential risk, I would say, for the design professional. In 2008, the American Institute of Architects instituted some new contractual language and changed its code of ethics. And one of those is that it depends on its members to become experts in sustainability. They must have courses in sustainability. They must keep up their credentials by having so much information in sustainability. But let's be realistic. How many of them do attend these courses? How many actually understand the LEED rating system forwards and backwards? How many of them understand all the new rating systems that are coming up every week? Because they are very specific to a region or to a zone or to a state. They vary completely. So when we look at some of the things that have occurred in 2012, 6 new documents were added to the AIA. One of these being B214-2012, which is the standard form of architect service specifically for LEED certification. It really looked at the scope of the documents and what that person or that architect was responsible for, that design professional. However, there's a little caveat, and this is where it gets a little muddy, is if they don't write this into the owner-architect agreement, it's not effective. So look how we've already muddied the waters just by not adding one document into the contract. So certainly some of the services they must provide under this architectural contract is that they must conduct a LEED workshop, and that's for everyone that's going to be on the project. We're starting to see a changeover from all the subcontractors to more integrated design. So they want everyone to understand. And actually in version 4 that's upcoming in the LEED rating system, they actually have a credit associated with integrated project design. Certainly they look at registering the project. So now they've assigned that this architect is now responsible for registering the project in which they are in charge of. And then they also look at submitting the documentation to the GBCI. So certainly we've seen a change, and part of this is due to the litigation that has happened in the past, which pretty much started in 2007, but part of it is they constantly see a change in more progressiveness in the US GBC. Here are some other potential risks that we see in the documents that are associated through AIA. The ones in black are with the architectural or the design firm, and the ones in blue are more the conditions for the contractor. So we can see anything from agreement between the owner and the contractor. We can see, if I went back one, we could say in this standard form of architectural services, it really delineates is the contractor the one working on the project, or is he a consultant to the project? And then we go back and we look at this again and we say standard form of agreement between owner and architect for use of a sustainable project. These are all sustainable project driven. These seem to assist the parties, but as an architect or as a design professional, I would not rely on them because there are little loopholes in every single part of this. So when we look at the new International Green Construction Code, which just recently came out in 2012, we really see that the standard care has been increased on the architect. Not only do they need to be aware of, the degree of knowledge, their skill, and the judgment on the project, they now must know sustainability and how it will impact the project, the neighbors to the project, the environment, what are the social attributes, and what are the economic attributes. So we've made them increase their level of awareness. And certainly now also there's options within IGCC 2012. They can take something that is very specific to that specific town in that specific region in that specific state, and that architect must be aware of it. If they're not aware of it, they might be in breach of contract if they don't deliver the correct type of solution. So certainly it's very critical for architects, contractors, and developers to really read and understand the unique requirements for every single project they're on. So, and another part of this is to research the green building products that are going to be used. Now, I don't know about you, and I deal in sustainability every day. I can't keep up with every single product that is out there. And certainly it does cause issues. And I'm going to talk about a few cases in litigation which will really expand upon this. Now, I'm not leaving the contractors out of this by no means, because the contractors really face a lot of consequences if they do not meet the LEED criteria as well. And I will say that I have a tougher time with the contractors and educating them. I spend a lot of time educating my contractors about a number of contractor-specific issues. It talks about performance versus design, which is the two parts that we talk about in the LEED rating system. Guaranteeing LEED certification. One little screw up by a contractor can cost you LEED certification. One little screw up, and I'll tell you one off the cuff in a minute. But there's potential delays. But there's also things like green bonds that are out there that they're being funded based on giving a green project or meeting a LEED certification. Now, it's really important as a contractor, if you do not understand LEED, you need to get informed about LEED if you're going to work on one of these projects. So when we talk about litigation, again, this comes back to what kind of litigation has surrounded LEED projects. It's really can be boiled down to 6. I'm going to talk about 5. One is LEED certification challenges, where a project doesn't meet what you expect it to meet, failure to obtain certification, green building material product defects, misrepresentation and fraud, a term that we well known in the litigation, but how does it relate back to LEED? LEED costs, and certainly LEED bonds. When we look at certification challenges, what we're really saying is that, let's say a project was awarded LEED Gold. Well, if you were awarded LEED Gold, you might be getting a lot of tax abatement, you might be getting a lot of rewards from the local community, you might be receiving some IRS funding or governmental funding. But if you don't meet that criteria, that can all be snatched away in an instant. So it's really important that if you're going to meet a level of LEED certification, that you have the documentation to back it up. In this case, the Wisconsin schools were challenged on LEED certification of a building that had been created. And what happens is that the Green Building Certification Institute can go back and challenge and make sure those credits were achieved. So if we go back to my original discussion, if you're banking on getting tax abatements and those things, and all of a sudden your LEED certification is challenged to a lower level, you may lose a lot of money. If you're dealing with green bonds, you just now may owe the tax man as the developer because you have not met that standard. So it's really very, very important that you have the right personnel working on the project, you know what's going on within the LEED projects, and you fulfill the requirements. Here is the first case that was ever really litigation. It's called the precedented case. It's the Shaw Development versus Southern Builders. And this was really failure to receive LEED certification. This was a condominium unit that was in Maryland. It was approximately $7.5 million in cost, or the construction was $7.5 million, and the contract required that it meet silver certification. It did not meet this certification level. someone's liable for this because they're expecting tax abatements. They lost almost $635,000 in lost tax credits from Maryland. So who are they going to hold accountable? The problem at this point was, this occurred in 2007, there was really no documentation in place to decide who was responsible for the lead documentation and certifying the project. No documentation. It's changed a little bit now because we certainly have seen what the AIA's put in place. But it really comes down to when you make a document, you must expressly assign lead certification responsibilities to someone. Now it's typically the architect on record. But certainly they are responsible now for registering the project, compiling all the information, applying for certification, responding to any USGBC request, and then prosecuting the appeal process, because sometimes credits are challenged. So they need to be well versed in a variety of areas within the lead rating system. So here's a real life example again. Now I'm going to move on to another part of some litigation. Here's an example where we had materials. They wanted to use a green product from a new manufacturer. Always you see slick literature out there. Now that slick literature may be true or not true. There's some things that are happening in the pipeline right now that are going to help you see what's slick literature and what's not slick literature. The owner decided to go ahead and use this based on the architect's opinion. There's one problem. Product wasn't manufactured close by and it really wasn't readily available. I've got a transportation issue. The project was delayed. That costs a lot of money to delay a project. So the contractor demanded increased payments for overhead, lost profits, and out-of-sequence construction. We all know what happens when a project gets delayed. It costs money. So the owner brought claim against the architect. What we really need to pay attention to is if we're going to use a new technology, you have to confirm that the product's available. Is it local? Do I have to import it? Where is it coming from? What's the production capacity? All of these play into the decisions that are made in the products that are used on a project. What's the expected level of performance? New products have risks. We all know that. No one really, as an engineer, we're a little more cautious. We don't want to be the first one to put our stamp on that. As architects, we're more willing to put ourselves out there and say, I want to try it. But the delay may cause lack of availability. Or if it's a new product, it may be questioned by your building officials. Your building officials are kind of the last in the line to learn what's new and upcoming. They're used to doing what they've been doing the whole entire time of their careers. They're clueless when it comes to sustainability. Trust me, I talk to a lot of them all the time, and they're like, what's this? I don't understand why I have to have that. It's green? Oh, all right, whatever. Failure to perform. One of the landmark cases was Chesapeake Bay Foundation against Weyerhaeuser. And this was a green building material product defect. Well, you can read this. They used wood. Well, that was their first mistake. Come on, we're in the Concrete Institute here. They used a renewable resource. Yes, I'm glad someone found this funny as I did. But they used a rapidly renewable material that was wood that could turn over in 5 years. It's rapidly grown. Well, they put this in a building where that was going to be environmentally exposed. Okay, so what designer decided on this particular aspect? So they found that they were having problems with the building, and they decided to go back and look at the wood and see how the wood was treated. Well, what happened is that the wood was treated with a pressure-treated preservative. They were told that it would work. They were told that this was a low VOC type of system. The problem was after 9 years, we started to see a lot of rotting, and this really jeopardized the integrity of the entire structure. They have beam trusses and columns and beams that are holding up this building that they have paid a lot of money for, and it's failing. So what happened is there were damages of breach of contract, common law indemnity, contribution, negligent misrepresentation, and negligence. I mean, this became a hazard to be in this building. What if this building fell down and there was loss of life? Now we've got a bigger issue. So certainly there was a $6 million settlement made on these, but this was based on the product allegedly failed when exposed to the elements. So you must understand how your products are going to perform. Some of the products that are out there today are greenwashed. I'm not going to lie to you. They say they're very green. They say they're going to do this, and they don't. We really need to research these projects. There is a Federal Trade Commission guides for the use of environmental marketing claims called Green Guides. It's right now under ISO 14022, which I can self-proclaim what my product is going to do for you. I can tell you, being on the cement manufacturing side, I'm really diligent and ethical about this. I can't say that everyone else that offers other building materials are quite as diligent and ethical as I am. So a lot of times we see disingenuous spinning of how their products and policies are environmental friendly. It doesn't always meet the bill or the criteria. It's called green marketing or green sheen. There is something that's happening right now to stop this. It's a scientific-based model which is based on life cycle assessment called environmental product declarations. They are not been placed into service quite yet in the United States. They are available in Europe, but they are coming very soon. So this will help stop this type of fraud and misrepresentation. But there's other types of fraud and misrepresentation we need to be aware of. There's things like unfulfilled expectations. Some of those are saying, if I put in this furnace, I can expect a 30% reduction in the amount of energy that I'm going to be required to pay for in the future. LEED buildings will have a higher market value. I'm going to be able to rent this structure for more money because it's a green building. I think some of you have seen some of this, and I see it in Columbus, Ohio, because they get about 6% more rent per month because it's a LEED building. I should come back because it says workers will be healthier and have increased productivity. That's my favorite. Real life examples. An architect said, look, if we make a LEED building, your students are going to be so much more focused. Your guy will not miss work as much because he won't be sick. I got a healthy building for him. Guess what? Someone documented it wasn't quite true. He still had a lot of sick employees. He had some complaints. I've got eye strain because I've got more ambient light, but I'm in Minnesota and there's no sun today, so I've got to use my lamp, and I've got more eye strain than I've ever had. I'm not warm. I'm really cold. What's with this furnace system? It's supposed to be energy efficient, not energy non-existent. There are issues here. So the owner sues the architect, the tenant sues the architect, bodily injury, it's not designing a healthful workplace. One of the landmark cases, again going back to that, is misrepresentation of energy reduction when it was Get 'em All versus Site 1617 development. They promoted what was supposed to be a LEED building that was going to perform and provide lower energy requirements. That may be water, it may be electricity, it may be heat, it may be air conditioning, all of the things associated with energy. Well, the owner sued the building developer and manager for $1.5 million and said, my tenants aren't happy. They're cold. There's no heat in this building. It's energy efficient. No, it's not existent. It's on low. I can't even get warm. This was resolved outside of court, but you can see where this is going. You never want to make a third-party claim. It's the kiss of death. You know, you must really be careful not to expressly or imply or warrant the ultimate performance of a green building. So if you say it's a healthier green building because of this, you better have something to prove it. You must have some science behind what you state. What about costs? Most of us have heard about NASCAR. Kurt Busch Kyle Busch just won the Texas Speedway the other day. He decided that he's an environmentalist. He wants to have the best, most optimized, energy efficient race shop in the Carolinas. So he started a process, and they started the green construction. But what the architect failed to do is tell him how much more it was going to cost. So he started saying, wait, you told me you were going to give me a green building, you didn't tell me it was going to cost this much more. You know, some of the the prices out there are 2 to 5%. Well, it depends on what products you use. It would have been good if the contractor had informed him how much more it was going to cost. Well, they basically said, well, he's just a snot-nosed young kid and he wants a green building and he just doesn't want to pay for it. The fact was that he made change orders and they were never really thoroughly discussed. So, what we really need to look at today is there are large economic developments that are happening out there with LEED construction. And if we're not aware of unfulfilled expectations or we see demand of guarantee of LEED certification, we need to be aware of how we need to deal with that. You know, this sometimes can conflict with the architect and the design group that's out there. And certainly, there's not a single sole party in control. That's a big problem here. No one controls everything. You have a lot of different trades that are in there at one time. They're overlapping many times because of the integrated design process. So we have to understand what these risks are by each subcontractor, the GC, the architect. We all must be aware. So what do we do to be successful? First, we have to understand, are they looking for a LEED certified project? Any more sometimes want a green building, but it doesn't have to be LEED certified. There are two different things there. And you really have to delineate, what do you want? You have to ask your owner, do you want it certified or do you not want it certified? If you're going to certify it, there's extra fees associated with that. You need to relate that to the owner. Certainly you have to look at what is the desired level of certification, because that is going to be based on the number of points or credits. And some of those cost more than others. If you're going to have your entire building optimized for energy efficiency, that costs a lot of money because you have to rotate your building to 4 different sides to make sure what the energy is going to be. There's a lot that goes into this. You have to look at the specifications. You have to understand what products are available. How close are they? All of these go into the LEED rating system. How far are you bringing a product in from? And certainly you have to look at specifications. So when I look at successful LEED projects, I'm looking at what should the contractors do and what should the architect do. Certainly you need to spell out the requirements for certification, performance-based standards, what are your goals, what are the deadlines? What are the clear terms in the subcontracts? You cannot leave them vague, because if he's responsible for filling out part of the documentation, he doesn't know that, you may be chasing him for the next 9 months to get it. And at December 31st, when that documentation is due, you're going to be hoping he knew that that was part of his contract. You need to have specific specifications, because if they're vague, they're going to kill you. And certainly we have to make sure that the specifications are a little bit different than the certifications. And finally, it's often good if you have someone that has experience in this kind of work, because if they don't, they're going to fall into some major pitfalls. So I often say that communication is key here. You know, now there is a credit that's going to be available in version 4 to have pre-design meetings, to have a lot more interaction between your contractors and your architects. I think that's very good, but you have to ensure coordination and make sure you're on track. And certainly, I always say, ask for provisions of checklists. And certainly, do not ever give verbal acceptance of a change order, because as an architect, it's your responsibility to tell them how much it's going to cost. But more so, if you're a contractor, if you do not have it written, it can come back to bite you severely. And I will say this, I know a contractor that got a change order, didn't document it. He wasn't given a product list of what was approved and what was not approved. So I went in, and this comes down to paint. There's a VOC limit in LEED. He ran out of paint. So he sends Joe Schmo on his team to go down and pick up some paint. Well, Joe doesn't know this is a LEED building. He doesn't care. He goes down and he buys a gallon of paint. You come back and they finish painting the wall. Problem was, it wasn't low VOC, and it knocked him totally out of the specification of what I call the VOC bank, and they lost 4 credits. 4 credits cost them gold certification. It cost his boss about $3 million. Let's just say it was a very costly mistake that could have been avoided by having something like approved selections. And I don't say one, I always tell my contractors, get 3, because you may go here and they don't have that product, but if you go over to this other product store, they may have it. So certainly, it's important to understand the project and to avoid litigation. So that's my close, and if you have any questions, I know I'm running probably a little long, so you can catch me afterwards.
All right.